Hi, everyone. Welcome to our WeSchools webinar, Every Little Bit Counts. We're excited to have you here on our YouTube video. And we're going to introduce a little bit about the two of us. My name is Jillian. I'm a manager of virtual programming here at WeSchools. I've been with the organization for over 2 years now. And fun fact is that last New Year's, I was in Kenya at one of our wee villages, and it was very fun.
Awesome. Hello, YouTube land. My name is Elizabeth. I'm the Associate Director of Professional Learning. I've been with the organization for over 3 years, coming up on my 4th year. Fun fact is I teach yoga on weekends. Really happy to be with you.
Awesome. So today's topic is Every Little Bit Counts, Elevating Your Next Coin Drive with WeSchools. So we're going to dig into 4 different topics. We'll start with how can you make a global impact? What are all of the different ways where you can give globally and learn about global issues? Next, we'll look at some existing coin drives that already exist. After that, we'll talk about elevating coin drives through the WeSchools program specifically, and then we'll talk about next steps to get doing. Great. So how can we make a global impact? Through WeSchools, we oftentimes talk about impact in 6 ways. So 6 different ways to take action. And the idea here is that if you can broaden your idea about what action is, it allows you to be much more innovative with the impact you're able to make. And so you can make a global impact through volunteering at an organization like Feed My Starving Children, raising awareness through a movie night about a social issue that's happening globally that you want your student body to learn about. Fundraising is what we'll focus on today, so we'll talk more about that. Material collection, so this could be collecting old batteries and then turning them in, using those funds to donate to an organization. Behavior change, and advocacy. Advocacy is writing to your local or national decision makers and advocating in that way. So we'll focus on fundraising today, specifically around coin drives, but just know the 6 different ways to make impact, and all of them can make an enormous impact, whatever it is you choose to do with your students. So a look at some existing coin drives. I'm going to give a few examples. I found these from just Google, but the idea here is there are already so many great ideas out there for you to look up and use with your students. So feel free to look online and see what's already been done so you're not totally recreating the wheel. Here are some examples. You can start with anything from a simple poster, just some friendly class competition between grades. I really like this one. It's sort of a piggy bank theme and who can get the most in a different grade. To add on to that, I like the idea of using an incentive. Oftentimes there's an incentive of like the winning group gets a pizza party, but sometimes that can be a little bit expensive for schools and they don't want to do that. So a low cost idea might be to choose a different teacher that you want to slime, or you can do a whole host of other things that are lower cost. And Elizabeth has an idea for that as well.
One of our WeSchools around Halloween, they were donated a bunch of pumpkins, and each teacher decorated the pumpkin, and kids got to vote on which one they loved the most, and those funds went to cancer students who were kids who have cancer. So that's a creative way too of it's not really necessarily a competition for a prize, but like awarding excellence, and like voting with your money is another strategy that students can take part in.
Yeah, I love the pumpkin idea. And I've seen this one with the slime too, or like a pie teacher in the face. Students love it. It's really funny. And here's another one that I really like. It's one of my favorite examples that I found. And so they kind of combine their coin drive with the Spirit Week. And every day of the week, they encourage people to bring in a different type of money. So you can see on the first day, which is a Wednesday, it's pennies for paws. And if you bring in pennies, you can wear red or an animal print. The next day, they do nickels. And you can do like a Spirit Day, you wear the school colors. The day after that, it's a wear comfy cozy if you bring in dimes, so it could be like a school pajama day. then quarters, and you can wear like wacky clothes, and then Twin Tuesday at the end with any coin. So oftentimes when you're doing a coin drive, you'll see that people give one time. They might give a few dollars in coins in the beginning of the week, and then they kind of forget about it, or they're not really engaged after that, and they just give once. So how can you get people excited over the course of a week or many weeks to continue giving? This is an idea for that. You can have a different coin per week if you want. They did a different coin per day here. But how can you incentivize people to stay engaged? Maybe each day you share a new fact about the cause that you're raising funds for. And so this is a great way to keep people giving back and keep people learning about the cause that you're trying to give back to. And then I'll also show at the bottom, you can see here, it says also for every dollar we raise, Scholastic Book Fairs donates one book to charity. So they were able to get double the impact out of this drive by also partnering with another organization. So that's also something you can look into. Who can you partner with in your community, or what other organizations can you partner with that might do a match or might do some way to elevate the impact?
I love that. And I think that's a great opportunity for your students to investigate who might be a logical match. For penny drives, it doesn't always have to be the teacher planning everything and then investing the kids to participate. That's a great opportunity for kids to practice those speaking skills of calling someone up, requesting a match, explaining about their cause. That's really valuable learning.
Yeah. It makes me think about one of our educators who had her students write letters to local organizations to partner with, and they ended up getting a lot of in-kind donations from a local bakery, and they gave back their time by volunteering at the local bakery, cleaning up and helping with tasks. So possibilities are endless here. This is an example I really love. And the last example I'll give is this visual example of how they keep track. And Elizabeth, you want to talk a little bit about this one?
I think this one just is a really good example of keeping folks anchored in what's the goal and what has been the change in donation weekly. Most of the donations happened in week one, but it's good to keep that tally so folks are aware of how much you're raising each week if it's over the span of just one day.
Yeah, and you can see in week 5 they had a huge jump in their donation. So I wonder what they did there, and maybe they did implement something like this kind of Spirit Week to get people excited again about it. So yeah, possibilities are endless. We encourage you to pause and just think about the past coin drives that your school has held and what was successful about them. So again, we're not always recreating the wheel, but you can also just build off of your past successes. So what's been successful for you?
And you can do this reflection with separately from your students or with your students.
Great. So for the rest of the time, I just want to throw out some essential questions that will guide the rest of our conversation. And they are, how can coin drives be impactful for your students and for your community? So not just for your students' benefit, but how are you drawing your community into this? How can you foster learning and dialogue between your community and those that you're hoping to serve? So how can you bring in the stories of people's lived experiences? Oftentimes there can be a power dynamic between the one who's giving and the one who receives. So how can you lessen that power dynamic by bringing in intentionally the stories of those who you're hoping to give back to? And how can you be sustainable? So this can take forms, take many different forms, but how can you make sure that this coin drive is repeatable, that it's something that you can bring back year over year and engage your students, is how we'll mostly be talking about it today. And also, how can you sustain the learning? How can you make sure this doesn't feel like it's a one and done activity, but that it builds? So we'll talk about those things in our conversation today. We're going to start here with the 4 steps of We Schools. So this is really what our entire program is rooted in, the 4 different steps of We Schools, starting with investigating and learning about a topic, action planning, taking action, and then reporting and celebrating at the end, with reflection throughout the activity. So oftentimes with a coin drive, you're just doing action planning, you're planning for your coin drive, and then taking action, you're doing your coin drive. So today we're going to be focusing primarily on investigating and learning, and reflection, those pieces that aren't touched as often in the coin drive, a regular coin drive. So for investigating and learning, some questions to consider are how can students be involved in selecting the cause? Like Elizabeth said, it's not something, coin drives don't have to only live with you as the educator planning it. How can you draw your students into the process of helping them be the ones to select the cause? When you're choosing an organization, consider who are we giving to and can we learn from their stories? We'll show an example of how this works with We Villages, but how can you bring in the stories or people's lived experiences? We've seen this with, if you're giving to a food bank, can you invite a representative from the food bank to come talk to your students? We've seen this with homelessness. There's a coalition that's here in Chicago of people who are fighting against homelessness, and they bring in people who now work for the organization who serve on panels, and they go into schools and talk about their experiences with homelessness and all of the policy that's around it and how students can get involved. How can you bring in people so that it's not just the idea of who you're serving, but you're hearing their real stories and you know a little bit more about who you're hoping to help. Another question is, what are the root causes that you're addressing? Oftentimes, organizations are not necessarily taking action on the root cause. They might be further down the line taking action on one of the symptoms of causes. An example of this is a food bank. You know, you're giving food to be used, but how can you analyze the root causes of hunger? Same with any global cause. How can you analyze the root causes? Oftentimes groups do this with a root cause tree exercise. We have activities that are a little bit similar, but think about the root causes you're addressing. Why are you choosing this charity over others? And think about, is it transparent? Is this an organization that is sustainable and making a sustainable impact? How can we deepen learning about the topic? Like I said before, consider inviting experts to help you deepen the learning and see resources that already exist. And then just some resources I wanted to share that might help in this process. So if you're saying to yourself, I want my students to choose a global cause they care about, I don't want to choose it for them. Think about the Issues Compass activity. I'll link it in the description. If you are saying to yourself, I want to lead lessons on the value of social entrepreneurship and the impact of charitable giving, I want to actually teach this in my classroom. We have lesson plans that are all about this. It's called We Create Change, and the topic is It All Adds Up. So I'll link those in as well.
And it's interesting to analyze common organizations. There are organizations all over the world that have like a CSR component, or a percent of their income or revenue goes back to an aligned organization. So that's a cool point of entry for students to analyze how is this happening in the real world and how can they be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you say, I want my students to understand global issues by hearing real stories, I would invite you to check out our YouTube page. You're already on YouTube, but go to @WeMovement. And this is what it looks like. We have personal stories from all of the pillars of impact, which we'll talk about, but people telling their real experiences and their real stories from their point of view is so important. So here's one that I really love, and we invite you to go look that up as well. So think about some other ways where you can learn about global issues with your students. You might want to talk about it with your students. What are ways that they would prefer to learn about global issues, and how can you bring those into the forefront?
And this is a picture of our We Illinois Youth Council. They meet monthly to discuss, to action plan together essentially. And they're a great example of, they don't meet very often. It's for 2 or 3 hours on a Sunday once a month. And this is a great example of every meeting being really objective driven. If you have limited time with youth, telling them ahead of time what you're discussing, so that time can be really purposeful decision making. This is a picture of their most recent meeting when they picked the pillar of impact that they'd like to fundraise for is education. So again, just being really objective driven, and thinking to yourself how you can front load so this can be student led.
Yeah, and here are the 5 pillars of impact. So they chose global education, as Elizabeth said, for their group passion project is what we call it. And so in our We Villages, we have 5 pillars of impact. That's all part of our sustainable development model, which happens in 9 different countries. So if you're choosing to fundraise for We Villages, you can choose any of the 5 pillars of impact or a holistic blend of them in any of the 9 countries that we work in. Our students happen to choose education because they, through doing a root cause analysis, actually were able to say and come to the conclusion that education can really help in a lot of these things, and it can be the start of a chain of reactions of impact. So that's why they chose education. But you can choose any of the 5 in our We Villages if you choose to fundraise for that.
Can I add something as well?
Yeah.
So kind of getting toward the root cause of what it means when you're donating to a pillar. It's essentially like a micro loan to that community, and it goes under the education bucket, and individuals from the community decide how they want to use or allocate those funds, because it's not like we're shipping a bundle of pencils that aren't going to contribute to their economy. Like, they get to decide, do we need these funds for materials, for infrastructure, for buildings, for trainings, for teachers? What's going to be the key lever for impact in our community? So it gets closer to the root cause, but we're contributing it from a relief effort standpoint through microloans.
Yeah, love that. Thank you, Elizabeth. And then, so after you investigate and learn, you go into action planning. Oftentimes, you might already have a way that you do action planning with students. I'll offer one way, which is the idea of SMART goals, which you might have heard of, and there's so many things about SMART goals online. We add to this by calling it Smarties goals. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But as you're planning with your students, think about, is our goal specific? Do we have the exact details of how this is going to work, when it's going to work, who's going to do what, those types of questions? Is it measurable? What's your numerical goal? What does success look like qualitatively and quantitatively? Is it achievable? So oftentimes students can be very ambitious in their goals. So is this something that you can realistically achieve in the time that you're given? Is it time bound? So when is this going to happen, and what are the sort of checkpoints along the way? And then we add on the IES, Smarties goals. Is it inclusive? Is it equitable? Is it sustainable? So inclusivity, you can think about, I oftentimes think about this within the group itself. How are we elevating voices of those who oftentimes aren't heard? How are we being inclusive of everyone in this room? And also, how are we including the community that we're hoping to serve into this discussion as well? That goes a little bit into equitable, yeah?
Another example of a We Schools, an example of this inclusive and equitable. They didn't have spare change to donate, but they had like soda pop tabs that they could collect and then get into coins, and that was their donation. So it's creative, out of the box thinking of how can everyone contribute.
I love that too. Yeah, there's one I mentioned before where it's batteries, and they collect old electronic like recycling, and they use that, they get the money from it, and they're able to donate that, because oftentimes people have a few dead batteries in their house that they don't know what to do with, that are going to be in a landfill anyway. So that's another way to do that, and I love it. And then sustainable. I guess that's an example of sustainability, but also how are we making sure that our event itself is sustainable? We've seen this in terms of, if you're doing like a book drive and you're not using all of the books, what are you going to do with the books that you're not going to use? Same with a clothing drive. If some of the clothing isn't exactly up to the quality standard you would hope, what are you going to do with those things? So think about sustainability in that way.
And sustainability and educators' effort too. If you need to sort through the pennies, the dimes, is that something you're going to do after school, or is that going to be a part of the student committee that's helping run this? How can they be involved in every step of the process? So it's not a teacher-led huge lift, but a big learning for students.
Awesome, yeah. And so we invite you to pause and think about, what are ways to educate participants about your cause and why it matters. Some ideas, the idea is, how are you going to get people excited about this? How are you going to bring in the stories of the different people you're serving? Some ideas we've seen for this are on the daily announcements, having an announcement every day about the coin drive with maybe a different fact or a different story. We've seen people do school assemblies or pep rallies where they share about the upcoming coin drive. We've seen people hold movie nights at their school. So really the possibilities are endless. We invite you to think about this for yourself and also alongside your students.
Parent-teacher conferences, also if you're thinking about like a problem-solving question for students, is where will there be a lot of people? Sporting events, parent-teacher conferences are also pockets of time.
Yeah, awesome. And then after you action plan, it's time to take action. There's not a lot here because you already are planning on doing a coin drive. That is the action. So get doing, record and share your progress. Try to take photos if you can to remember and reflect on later. Think about how you'll maintain momentum. I'll share some examples here of coin drives that I've also really liked. So this one here, you can see at the beginning, they state what their goal is. So I think that's really important. Always start with your goal. That's part of the Smarties goals. Make sure you have that goal available so that people know what they're shooting for. This is an example I really love for someone's coin drive. You can see here that the grand prize was sliming one of their teachers, but that's not the part that I like the most. The part I like the most is circled in pink, and they say, plan to attend our family night. Midwest Bank will be on hand with our coin drive, and they'll count the coins and match our fundraising efforts. So this again, try to get your students involved with finding organizations that might want to be involved in this, that might be able to match your donations or maybe give you an in-kind donation. So if you're holding an event, oftentimes stores like Target will give food or different things to make the event possible. So think about who you can partner with to make your impact bigger. Another one I like is this. Each level of funding that they have, or each dollar amount, corresponds to a different level of impact. So you can think about that too. We Villages has a whole guide of the dollar amount and the impact it corresponds to. So for example, $25 is enough to give one student school supplies for an entire year. Things like that, and that makes this more tangible for students. They know exactly what the impact is going to, which can be very powerful and also be really important as they're thinking about how much they might want to give in your coin drive. Great, so after you do your coin drive, it's time to reflect, record, and celebrate. Make sure you're finishing strong by returning to your Smarties goals. Were you successful? In the beginning, you asked yourself, what does success look like? So were you successful in meeting your goals? And then integrate in reflection. What does your donation mean? How does it impact others? And also, how are you impacted by this? How are your students impacted by this? How is their mindset shifted through participating in this? Or what's one thing they learned that they're going to take with them? And then celebrate, share out, and incentivize. So what are the sort of prizes or any incentives that you have along with this? And last but not least, share with your WeSchools program manager. We always like to hear about your stories of impact. We're able to share them with other groups because oftentimes your success inspires others. So make sure to tell your program manager or reach out to us if you don't know who it is, and we're happy to make sure that we hear about your story. The resource that I'll put in the link is a reflection toolkit, and they have dozens and dozens of reflection activities, all the way from 30 seconds to several days. So reflection's always possible, no matter how much time you have. We'll share the link of our favorite reflection activities below. And here's an example I like of sort of reflection and keeping track of the impact that one school did for another organization. You can see here that they sort of kept track and were able to say how many students they were able to send to school. So they made it really tangible, 7 kids to school, and they learned a little bit about where they were giving to. This was a fundraiser for students in Angola. So there were some facts about Angola, some stories, and so this is something that you can consider about how you might visually show your impact. You can also pause here and think about how you might also be able to include other reflection activities in your coin drive. Great. And next steps, so we're almost to the end here. Your next steps are to sign up for the We Create Change campaign online. You can go to we.org/WeCreateChange or /WeCreateChange to sign up. You can get one-on-one support from a program manager. We are able to sit with you one-on-one and talk about different plans for planning your next coin drive. And then also you can give us your feedback if you'd like in our survey. For We Create Change, when you go to the webpage, you'll see this. You'll see a sign up now button. That's where you'll want to sign up so that we know to reach out and check in and see how your coin drive is going and offer you any support. That's also where you can find and get access to our lesson plans and different resources to support you in your next coin drive. So with that, we have reached the end. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope that you can tell us about your next coin drive, and we hope that it's successful.
Thanks. Enjoy Connect to the Learning.